In 1981, Ronald Reagan was inaugurated. Reagan served 2 terms, so his economic policies stood for basically the entire 80s. Towards the end of his term, Jimmy Carter, the previous president, appointed a man named Paul Volcker as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the central banking system for the entire country. To put this in perspective, banks called commercial banks lend to consumers, and other banks such as the Federal Reserve, financial institutions only lend to each other. The Federal Reserve is made up of a board of governors, chairman, vice chairman, and advisors. This Federal Reserve is monitored by none other than Congress itself. Commercial banks are where common people deposit savings from their jobs and withdraw cash to buy certain items from random places. Commercial banks happen to also be the place where people get mortgages or loans. However, these banks do not have enough liquid money ready at any given time to distribute to everyday people. Commercial banks get this money from financial institutions through interbank loans. When financial institutions give money to commercial banks to give to consumers, they charge an interest rate, which translates to commercial banks paying financial institutions to give loans. These financial institutions receive money to give to commercial banks from the Federal Reserve Banks. The Federal Reserve consists of 12 Federal Reserve Banks. When these banks give money to the financial institutions, they also charge an interest rate that is always higher than the interest rate of the financial institutions they are giving money to. The interest rate of the Federal Reserve and its banks is called the federal funds rate. Well, let's go back to Paul Volcker. As the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he was able to decide the federal funds rate, and his decision would greatly affect the economy. The higher the federal funds rate, the less money is in circulation and the harder it is to receive a loan. Throughout this entire time period, inflation was growing out of proportion. In 1978, the federal funds rate was 9%. In July of 1980, he raised the federal funds rate by 11%, bringing it to 20%. The main goal of this was to fight the rising inflation, but it came at a cost. It caused an enormous recession. Business bankruptcies rose 50% over this one year. Farmers were especially hit hard, as agricultural exports declined, crop prices fell, and interest rates rose. But while the medicine of a sharp slowdown was hard to swallow, it did break the destructive cycle in which the economy had been caught. Luckily, this recession only occurred for a short period of time, and by the following year, in 1981, the recession was over, the economy had rebounded, and was booming once again. Immediately after the federal funds rate increase, most of the population thought Volcker was crazy. But today, his decision is viewed by people of both political parties to be one of the best ones in banking history. The annual inflation rate remained under 5% throughout most of the 80s. Now, let's go back to Reagan. Almost immediately after being elected, he made several tax cuts. The theory was that lower tax rates would induce people to work harder and longer, and that this in turn would lead to more saving and investment, resulting in more production and stimulating overall economic growth. While the Reagan-inspired tax cuts served mainly to benefit wealthier Americans, the economic theory behind the cuts argued that benefits would extend to lower-income people as well because higher investment would lead to new job opportunities and higher wages. Reagan believed that unrestricted capitalism leads to opportunity and prosperity, which ultimately helps everyone. The government should not be too involved in the economy and businesses. In addition, he believed that spending extra money on the military was a necessity. After the largest tax cuts in our country's history, $1.6 trillion was spent on the military. After 1982, the economy did nothing but improve. An average GDP growth rate is about 3 to 5%, and above that, without a doubt, is outstanding. After 1982, the book 1984 predicted almost everything about 1984 to be terrible, but the economy directly proved this wrong. The GDP during this year was 7.3%, which is nothing short of fantastic. However, despite Reagan and Volcker making the economy boom out of proportion with tax cuts and an increase in the federal funds rate, the national deficit grew exponentially. The national debt in 1980 was $383 billion, and in 1988 it had become $2.3 trillion. Reagan's total deficits were more than all the previous presidents combined. In total, Reagan had added about $1,917 billion to the country's debt. This was the